Again, I'm here with Brant and Aodhán, who will introduce themselves in a moment. And we're here to talk about mythology and also psychotherapy and working with groups. And I'll just sort of jump right in. Brant, I know that you at one time worked with, I guess, adventure type stuff, and you utilized the myth and archetypal theory to conduct rites of passage for young men. I wonder if you could give an example of what that looked like in one of your groups and maybe how it relates to myth.
Yeah. Those are talking almost about two very similar but and related but distinct chapters of my career. The adventure, when you hear adventure therapy, at least when I hear adventure therapy in this day and age, a lot of that is codified folks moving away from using the terminology wilderness therapy, which has gotten a lot of bad press recently. So anything that's adjacent to that, that's attempting to use the power of wilderness and nature and getting kids kind of out and present and in the moment and doing things that are peak experiences, which is great. A lot of times gets called adventure therapy. But I did wilderness guiding for a wilderness therapy organization for about 4 years, which was, really like a coming of age thing for me as a staff. That was really where I started becoming a lot more introspective about the role that I allow fear to play in my life, like the patterns that I have in my family system, all of this stuff while watching these therapists and these guides and these students do their work. It was really a powerful process for me. But then during the pandemic years, really, and kind of fortuitously, like right as the pandemic hit, I was transitioning into a leadership role as the director for a nonprofit that works with adolescent young men and also trains mentors. Being the director in a small nonprofit, I had a lot of say in shaping how the trainings went and what kind of modalities that we used. And the nexus between mythology and personal development had really hit home for me during the wilderness therapy years. There were a couple of therapists I can remember who introduced me to works by Robert Bly, which is kind of opened up this whole field of mythopoeticism, which is like this post-Jungian way of looking at myth as not as so much accounts of the past or explanations of the universe, but accounts of within. So looking at the characters in myth as parts, like looking at it as parts work effectively. And I found that, mind-blowing and really a fantastic tool. And it interestingly really resonates with young people pretty effectively. I've seen it be a tool that really engages teens and adolescents that otherwise might not be engaged in the material. And we built a specific training for our staff that we did in like a retreat setting using Robert Moran and Douglas Gillette's work. They have a book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a simple framework. One of the things that we say early on in the book is that it's, I think in this day and age, easy to feel a little bit jaded or skeptical about a framework like this. And what's helpful for me, at least, is being willing to like dive into the dramatic, understanding the dramatic, as Marianne Woodman says, over dramatizing is useful. It helps provide this beautiful contrast. It helps bring kind of that sacred archetypal feel into the mundane. And so we can look at our roles in groups. We can look at how we're showing up towards challenges in life and really bring like an archetypal lens, the lens of the hero. And using that language actually makes it more powerful, makes it more clear for us to see. So I know I'm saying a lot, but to answer your question, we built a training off of that framework for mentors to really take a day each and develop both their own inner warrior, inner magician, inner lover, inner king, but also working on how we see that and honor that in the boys that we were working with, kind of in the context of Campbell's hero's journey.
Yeah, so I guess I'm familiar with all the things that you're talking about. I did the men's one of the there's a Warriors Workshop thing, which is like a men's group thing, and there's also one of the spinoffs is I'm forgetting the name of it now, but I did that for 5 years, and so I'm familiar with the book and all these sort of things. I guess what I was looking for it's a little bit unfair because I'm asking you to a retrospective thing. This is a long time ago,
Mhm.
but we're talking about myth and interventions. And I guess what I'm asking you is for like a sort of a story that sort of illustrates sort of the power of it and what it like look like and how it might have transformed a situation or an individual.
Yeah. So in the training that I referenced, it was pretty common to we saw men in tears. For like I'm thinking of we had a couple of guys that have done the work probably in some of the organizations that you're even referring to, like who headed up the King Day and like planned that day out. And so a lot of that was one specific example, a close friend of mine who you've met, Aodhán, at least virtually. He, I don't want to out who he is, but he had worked as a wilderness therapy guide. He's a therapist. He had never taken. He had this thing, something about his like did not like to be barefoot, did not like to be barefoot in the woods. And one of the activities that the leaders of the day had us do was to walk with a partner barefoot through the water, and then wash your partner's feet. Which is like can be a pretty intimate experience. I think, yeah, I found that powerful. It was extremely powerful for my friend who had some blocks around that. And so this was in the service of looking at under the king archetype. There's regenerative properties, there's generosity, and there's a sense of service, which I think is one of the pieces that we have a big miss on in our society, and who we elevate into like kingly positions. We don't. It's like we've lost that sense of where's the service in that and honoring that piece. But this activity, and I think for my friend, like having his feet washed was like very humbling, scary, really, forced some uncomfortability and like helped him find his edge a little bit. In that training, we had some adolescents who were present, who had done some of the rites of passage works, who were ready to start stepping into the mentorship. So it's very like cyclical around that. That would be like one example of just the type of activity that we're using there. There's a lot of metaphor, of course, around water from like a post-Jungian standpoint. So like walking through the water is said to be unexamined conscious material or unconscious material, like spirit that's unconscious. So
now that I think about it, there's something, probably all of us have done personal growth works and groups and things of that nature. But you're referencing in the book, which I want you, Aodhán, to get around to you naming it, because it's an important part of probably why we're here. There's something about you use the word exaggeration, so you have these sort of archetypical sort of figures and embodying sort of archetypes. It helps make practical stuff a little bit more real, and it gives a sense of its possibility to transform things when we have these kind of things which are to some extent outside of our ordinary experience.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thought I had as you were talking.
Yeah, the consultants then, that I've seen, the most effective ones generally use very visceral and like imaginative interventions to make it very, very obvious what they think is going on in a group, say in an organization. They'll make it very visceral and like easy to imagine, and that always works. And it's similar to the myth, because when it's bigger and more imaginative, it's easier to see.
Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned naming the book, which is God's Heroes and Groups, relational subtext. What's that?
Hot off the presses, too.
Hot off the presses, yeah. Relational dynamics through mythic archetypes.
Yeah, there it is. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Since we're mentioning things, I should mention that on January 8th, these two gentlemen are going to be doing an exploration for the Sacred Inclusion Network. And,
18th.
Yeah, the 18th.
Yeah.
And we'll give you some information about that in the show notes. But Aodhán, if you could sort of like pick up on what Brant was talking about, I know you've done one of the things that unites us all. We all done group relations work, and I think probably most people that listen to this will have no idea what that is. So we need to have a definition of what, at least some easy explanation of what it is. And I guess my challenge for you, Aodhán, is to, um, since you've been looking at this now through, I'll call it a mythic lens, is to maybe give some illustration from your experience as to what an intervention might have looked like, or maybe could have looked like, that was transformative.
Well, from a mythic lens, then, well, there's a lot there, because if you don't know what group relations is, we'll have to explain that too.
You have to explain that, and I'm
Yes.
going to you.
So let me try give it a bash in a very simple way. For example, say you're going to a dinner with a bunch of friends, and you might say something in your head like, oh, she doesn't like him, but he likes her, something like that. And there's going to be an issue there at this dinner. Well, the purpose of group relations is to say these things out loud, to say the uncomfortable things out loud, and to deal with the dynamics that emerge within a group together in real time. So the emphasis is on sharing what's on your mind, how you're actually feeling, and to deal with what comes up. And then it's within an organizational context. So it's meant to help you become a better leader. It's often it is framed within, how you relate to authority, how people take up authority and push it off within groups, and sources of informal authority, and how that works. And it's generally, it's the theory behind it. There's psychoanalysis in it and systems theory. So it focuses on the unconscious within groups. And that's what the consultants will speak to.
The group thing is an important part to mention, because my understanding as to when it developed, there was kind of, you could say, a split between people that focus more like on personal development stuff and, like, let's feel good, let's just personal growth stuff. And the idea of the group is an organism.
Yeah.
So let's look at it from that point of view. And a lot of the people in the early days of consulting or the organizational dynamics, that kind of work, some of them were the same people, but some of them were different people. And, the people around the Tavistock Institute in particular developed this thing called group relations. But in any event, I think I interrupted you, Aodhán.
No, yeah. So one of the main ideas is that the group has an unconscious which is up to something. And that's not necessarily always in line with the group's stated goal. And then the purpose of the consultant is to try and point out what it might be up to. And that's one of the things. The term slips me. That's one of the assumptions that you have going into this work, is that there exists a group unconscious.
Yes,
I feel confident that it is. I agree with that. Like, I think there's, anytime we're in a group relations circle of folks that have been doing the work for a long time, and we try to nail down even something as simple as what is the consultant's role, everyone has like a different take. And I think what I would say is, in general terms, is to assist the group in seeing itself into learning,
right,
facilitating that process. And that gives you a lot of license to show up in some different ways. Just getting swept up in role is probably not one of those typically. But I guess, Angelo, your question too is for folks who have not ever experienced a group relations conference, like, what is it even, right? Like, and the short answer is it's, usually a group of 60 or so people come to a conference as participants. There's a leadership team that is, 6 to 8 consultants with the director. And you're in various groups throughout the conference that are planned. There's a large group where everyone's present. There's a small group where it's about 8 or so people with 1 consultant. In the large groups, you might have 3 consultants. And the general idea is that we're looking at what are the dynamics happening in the room right now. So you're not reading you're not like looking at a PowerPoint. You're not taking notes, or some people do take notes and usually it gets called out, but being in the moment with the group dynamics without a very clear crystallized task. Just that structure right there,
right,
is causes regression. It is, I would call it a borderline psychedelic experience for the duration of the conference. It is so wild to try to focus on that question of what's actually happening in the group, what roles are emerging, without having a crystallized task. Like if you asked us three to put together a Lego set, it's easy to attribute, well, Angelo took up a leadership role. He used to do some engineering classes back in the day, so I'm going to defer to him. You have these stories about why these roles emerge. And those stories sound great, and they can help us to kind of, they inhibit introspection, though, in a way, right? Like if our task is simply to look at the dynamics that are happening in the room, when Aodhán leaves the room to go to the bathroom, or when I speak up and I'm the confrontational one, or whatever it is, that can't be ignored. Or if it is ignored, that's more data about what's happening in the group. So just this structure that's a little bit looser and very in the moment is what a group relations conference is about. And the learning that occurs, in my opinion, it gets coded right into your nervous system. Like most people that I've talked to who go to a group relations conference, a lot of the time it's like how they saw groups before that, and then how they see groups after that. And the learning deepens over time.
What I'm trying to get to, and it's important that people have an understanding of what group relations is, because that your work to some extent comes out of it.
Yep.
I'm trying to get a sense as to how your take is different. In other words, like you got the mythic piece, which I've never really seen articulated to the degree that it's articulated in your book. So, we've all been in these situations where we're in groups, whether they're in a group relations group or just a group in life. So I'm just wondering what if we look at something like practical that actually happened through a mythic lens, what that might look like, and maybe something that actually happened would probably be better.
Yeah, I can give that a go. So this is one of the clearest illustrations. It was one of the first things I wrote about it in the book when me and Brant started collaborating. But it also makes me very uncomfortable, and I'm sort of even afraid of it being associated with me, because I don't want to keep talking about this as if it's the most important thing in group relations, which it's not. Attraction is just one part of human dynamics in a group. Attraction, how does that affect a group? Attraction between the sexes, same-sex attraction, how does that mess with a group staying on task? But in the book, I write about my experience with this in a group relations conference. And I pull on, I'm going to read a bit of it here, the temptress archetype, which is, associated with temptation, unrestrained sexuality. And the myth I use is Circe. I use the goddess Circe from Homer's Odyssey to illustrate that. So let me read a bit of it. Odysseus and his men land on the island of Aea, home of the goddess and sorceress Circe, whose home is encircled by strangely docile lions. She invites Odysseus's men to a meal of honey, cheese, and wine, which she has laced with a magical potion. On eating the meal, Odysseus's men turn into pigs. So I think the magical potion is pretty important here. So the story I tell in the book is that, I feel like the temptress emerged at this conference that I was at. It was a group relations conference I was at just after I met you, actually, Angelo. And one of the events in the conference is an intergroup event. And what happens at this intergroup event, at the beginning of it, is you've had a couple of days to sort of, meet each other and for some dynamics to emerge. And then you're put into a room together to sort of form groups around specific themes you want to work on. And maybe these themes have come up throughout the conference, So anyways, I remember this sort of push and pull to take a leadership role, maybe form my own group or not form my own group. And I see that there's a member who I call Z in the book, who has formed a group. And I remember throughout the conference, and actually in previous conferences I was at, this particular woman was very openly expressing her sexuality. So she would speak in, a kind of a slow, sultry way, and she complimented my physique and things like this. And that just stuck with me, as it would. And then in the intergroup event, she took a leadership role, forming a group. And then sort of without thinking about it, I joined this group. And I have to say that these things are very unconscious when they happen. And then upon reflection, this is where these things, you can sort of make sense of these things. But anyways, I join our group, and I sort of begin to if again I tie this to sort of following my instincts. Like the pigs in the myth. And then over the next 2 days, 2 days, I sort of begin to realize and feel shame and guilt, influenced by me being a Catholic, probably, to join the group for this reason. That's what I attributed to. I end up becoming very silent, not talking, and being unable to sort of contribute at all. It sort of brings the group to a standstill. So I end up actually just leaving the room without saying anything. And then returning the next day, I sort of tried to express what was going on, but I still couldn't find the words. The same sort of thing returned, same slowness, the same unable to communicate what was going on for me. And then I asked the group to help put words on what was happening. And they did help put words on what was happening. And the person I'm writing about said, "You're jealous of a dynamic between me and this other older member here." And then I remember the feeling of lightness coming off me. I was like, that's probably what is actually happening here. You know, I'm not the center of attention, something like this. I'm not the apple of her eye or something like that. You could say. And in the myth again, let me go back to it. When Odysseus goes to return to his men, the messenger gone Hermes tells Odysseus to eat the molly herb to protect himself from Circe's allure, and then lunge at her with her sword when he tries to strike him. Odysseus follows Hermes' instructions, and Circe immediately changes to a friendly and helpful force, eventually becoming Odysseus's lover, and he and his men live with her in luxury for a year. So again, the myth, the molly herb. So he takes up a different stance towards the feminine, or the temptress here. The molly herb is supposed to symbolize consciousness throughout history. Let me see here.
When the sword is important too, I think, like the fierceness without violence, right? I like that piece.
Yes, exactly. So I guess taking up a different stance myself and realizing what was going on for me sort of helped me to navigate the group better. Or led to me being unstuck in the group, I guess.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I remember I read that part of the book, I guess the general thing is that, I mean, we could talk about this all day. But now there's the Me Too thing is happening. There's all this attraction stuff always happening every day, between men and women, and it's like we don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't have an answer as to how we can, better utilize it. But I think that's a very appropriate, story that you told, and it kind of illustrates something which is missing in our culture.
Mm-hmm. Angelo, I think you posed just also the general question of like what makes this work different,
yes.
Right? And I mean, in a nutshell, you basically named it. We did not look out and see that there was much synthesis between mythological archetypes into group work specifically. There's a whole literature of really beautifully written. I mean, hugely influential for me. Robert Johnson, Robert Bly, Marion Woodman, Douglas Gillette, Robert Moore, all of these, Michael Mead, I can go on around how mythic archetype is applied to personal development, right, or understanding of personal psychology. Heard certain consultants bring myth into the room before in a really beautiful way. But I don't see us as utilizing that way of thinking in a like organized way. And so I guess our hope, we say in the introduction, we wrote the book basically because we wanted to read it and study something that was similar, and like there just wasn't a ton out there. And so, during the pandemic, when I was working for that nonprofit, I started just kind of writing out some essays, and it was a way of keeping myself sane and organizing some thoughts. And I think it became apparent that this could be a helpful synthesis of kind of two existing fields that really don't talk much. And just knowing the minds that are involved with group relations work, I think we both really see it as a starting point and something where, I don't have a PhD in mythological studies. I'm interested in myths, but there are folks that are, especially in the Jungian traditions, that are really deep and very sharp with their understanding of myths and have actually looked at these at a deep level. I think it's like the beginning of some helpful conversation. When we can attach story and mythic stories, specifically the stories that have stuck with us for so long that we compulsively retell, there's something about it's saying something about us. And so, we catch ourselves acting out these myths. And if we train ourselves to pay attention and to know the myths and to understand that story element and those different story arcs and how those different archetypes show up, we can kind of catch ourselves acting them out. Basically, it gives us a lot of information about potentially what's happening in the group, right? It's not the same as engineering a bridge where we have all of the answers, but we can look at that Odysseus story and say, like, hey, look, in this story, the masculine approaching the strong feminine from a very meek place is not the answer. It's damaging for the masculine. There's a fierceness that needs to be involved, and it's not violence. It's not striking Circe down, but that relationship, the strong feminine respects the strong masculine, the developed masculine, the balanced masculine. And so starting to ask those questions and think that way, I find it helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, this is maybe a little bit challenging, but what would a group relations conference look like if you explicitly said, you gave a title of, gave it a title similar to your book? I'm just asking. I'm just throwing it out there.
We've asked that question. Yeah. The short answer is I don't know. I think there'd be some pretty cool ways to format that. It's a conversation that I think we've had before. I feel like I recently, Aodhán and I visited Norway, and we're getting to, we presented to some consultants there, not GRC consultants, but work consultants, and we're, sitting in a sauna. And I feel like some of that conversation comes up in those pieces. Like, how do we build some experiential work around it? It's an open question.
Yeah, I'm sure, you could do it with the fullness of time. It's just a matter of time and intent.
Yeah, they do a lot of dream work.
Yeah.
In some of the conferences. There's some connections there. If I'm honest, I'm not sure that I've felt that dream work land as cohesively as I think it can. I think there's a lot of power there. I think these are continuing questions for how we design conferences. And I think it's a good conversation.
I think of what does all this mean in terms of, real life kind of thing. And I was very struck by reading the conclusion of your book. And, I mentioned it in the note that I sent to Aodhán, who you pronounce Aodhán, by the way, but that's another story. It's about Nelson Mandela's life. And, you talked specifically about, I wanted you to expand that. I was reading about this, that this is powerful. This is what he's talking about. Why doesn't he talk more about this? You're talking about the time where he pardoned, he pardoned all the people that were involved in the apartheid thing and created his whole structure for doing that. And I thought that there's like mythic elements in that, and also mythic elements in terms of how he approached, life. And I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, Brant, but maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess one of the scary things for me, at least in putting out the book, is that it covers so much material, and I'm certainly not an expert on most of it. I wouldn't call myself an expert. Yeah, I'm not. So I that specific piece of his life that really struck me, and I guess it, clearly stuck with me. And I think that I would even almost say that is a current modern myth at this point, like how Mandela
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of relevance for what I would say our current situation is, right? Like, regardless of where anyone falls on political spectrum or political beliefs, I think there's a sense deeply ingrained right now that the other side is and has done wrong. And a question I've often asked, like what is the way for, or I guess from any individual's perspective, what is the other person's way back? Because we're not gonna arrest half of the country, or like how do we grant grace to folks who have had different beliefs um and probably wanting the best world they can imagine, or acting on the in ways that we find unacceptable on whatever side of the aisle we're on. What is the way back? And it's hard even for me to imagine. I do think that accountability is important in general. I think that's an important principle. I don't think that it's tied in with this idea of justice, right? But what Mandela did, or at least the way I see it, is he took this like radical stance, moving away from this idea of retribution and really trying to create the better world for the children coming up, right? Like what's going to create the best world 10 years from now, 20 years from now for South Africa. And that is like the prospect of that. I know it's a hard and great question to ask, because it's so unsatisfying, because all of us, I think at some level, are programmed to want accountability for the bad guy in our mind, like whoever we project that badness on. And so, yeah, I kind of rambling now, but that big question of like, what is the way back for the folks that we disagree with? Whatever happens with these like cultural conversations, like how do we grant grace?
Mm-hmm.
How do we move? We look at the Gilgamesh myth, right, in the book, and we equate that to some of the like Time's Up, Me Too type of movements that have come up. I absolutely believe that there is, accountability, that we need to shine light into those dark rooms. And that's a really important thing that some of these movements have done. And also, what is the path towards a brighter future? Is it storming the castle and trying to topple Gilgamesh? The myth with Enkidu and the wild man, it's prescriptive. It has powerful feminine characters, and it has this union of the wild man who has this more balanced perspective or relationship with nature, come into the city and having a union with Gilgamesh that helps evolve him, right? So like that unbalanced masculine, which is really what we're talking about. Like how do we work with that?
A lot of these heroes that we have now, there are modern day, they're mythological figures. I mean, we're not, I'm not with Martin Luther King or Gandhi or any people like that, but there's elements in their lives which essentially are mythological. Yes, we can talk about, Zeus and all these sort of people, but, a lot of our present day heroes, in a sense, there's a mythic element about them. There's a mythic element about what they do. The last thing I'm stuck on Mandela a little bit, but there's one little story which I think is just beautiful. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time after when Mandela became president, there was a rugby match, and it was kind of a big deal for the country because the rugby team was doing very well and they became a championship. And he wore something which was emblematic of essentially almost like something about whiteness and apartheid or whatever that he sort of owned and made a sort of a transformative moment for the country. But anyway, I'm also guilty of rambling. But let me.
Yeah. I think he was like a pretty hardcore Christian, so he's definitely influenced by that story. Yeah.
Well, and that's a skillful way to work with projection, though. What you're talking about, right, is like diffusing and like, I mean, to me, I hear that and I immediately think like the suggestion there is like, let's take back our projections.
Yeah, and that links to what I wanted to say. Just the polarization in culture, like we all are on, we're all on one side of these lines at some point, and they get supercharged. But I think we say it in the book as well. Jim Krantz, curiosity is the cure of projection. And if you're unwilling to have these sorts of conversations, or like put aside your ego and be humble, like you'll never really understand someone else's perspective, which is why the group relations work is so powerful, right? And it's worth mentioning, like Brent, one of the scholars you mentioned earlier, one of the mythic scholars, I was actually working on, like, say, a partnership with their organization. And I mentioned Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson in an email. And they basically said, we can't work with people who who agree with these people's ideas. And I was really just taken aback by the fact that, they work in this mythic realm for 30, 40 years and write a bunch of books about it, but they they're stuck in the polarization. It's like that powerful.
Mm-hmm. So we have this event that's coming up on the 18th. I don't remember what we're calling it. I made this big thing about giving me a title, Aodhán, and I'm not remembering what it is. But in any event, we have this event that's coming up on January 18th, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. What do you expect? What would you like, ideally, people to get out of it? Probably people will have no background in group relations. Maybe some will. I don't know. But what are your hopes, and what are your hopes for this event?
Yeah, we usually, when we're presenting, try to give the high level framework stuff that just there's certain pieces that are helpful to know, right? Like you can't get away from like if there's information that somebody doesn't have, if you've never heard of a GRC, if you've never even thought about how groups work and the roles that people take and boundaries authority role, any of that stuff, you're really not, like those are helpful concepts. So we usually do a little bit of a framework breakdown. And then the other side of that coin is that the experiential is where this work becomes powerful. I think it's hard to care if you haven't had powerful experiences around it, right? Like, so I don't want to, sometimes the element of surprise is helpful for, and really generates beautiful talking points. But yeah, we try to make it an experiential process, giving prompts, having folks step into smaller groups. And then, one of the things that I do like to bring from group relations conferences anytime we're presenting is giving the audience a little bit of freedom and an experiential and some autonomy in how they form groups and all that. And then we can look at some of the stuff that happens, like Aodhán in Norway. It's like, okay, we had a small group leave the room. Why did that group leave the room? We had two members of the audience who the rest of the groups organized around. We noticed it, brought it up as a talking point. It turns out, to my understanding at least, that those were two people that held a lot of power in the organizations that had brought in the consultants. And so
And other people didn't necessarily know that.
Mm-hmm, right. And it wasn't even, yeah. So it was like the group knew it, and it wasn't even it wasn't like conscious, but the group knew. And so, yeah, I mean, I think things like that, I have found that I learn the best when I get caught in the act of doing something unconscious. That's always when somebody points out something, honestly, like Zachary Green did this to me in the conference. He's like pointing out where the shadow is or where the unconscious is operating. And you get caught red-handed acting out a role, or complying. What's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more powerful, like co-signing or cooperating with some unconscious thing that's clearly happening once it's named. That's really what I think helps spur curiosity. So folks that are inclined towards introspection, when you catch them acting out these group roles and it's compelling, that's going to be more powerful than any sort of PowerPoint presentation you can give. So we aim to create an experience like that if we can.
Stuff in this event.
Yeah,
what's that?
For sure.
We're going to get some here and now stuff in this.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
The one thing I sit on this, and I really believe this piece around the nature of group relations work, especially earlier on, is going to feel offensive to people. I left my first conference feeling offended. I was pissed off at Leslie for naming too much truth or whatever. I had a story in my head around like how he's like out to get me or he's got a problem with me or whatever it was. But, I was just wise enough at that point in my life to think, okay, well, maybe if it can offend me, just sitting in a room talking in a group can offend me so much, maybe there's something to learn there. Revelation, right? Like had to have a revelation. One definition of that is like it's the act of revealing. And so we have to, like, the taboo quality, the things that offend us, that's where we want to be curious, is around that point right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, in the vernacular, it's like you're there, it's uncomfortable, everything happens for a reason. What's the reason? Do you have the wit to ask yourself that question? Aiden, I'm going to give you the last word. What would you like people to get out of this event? And I know we don't want to ruin any surprises.
I think it's the embodied part is the most important. That's the biggest aspect from group relations is to really I don't know, almost be pulled outside of your normal ways of the things you think are normal about yourself, and that's just how it is. But if you can sort of almost allows you to step aside and be like, whoa, there's something going on there that I don't exactly know what that is, and to be more curious about what that might be and why I'm always finding myself in similar situations across groups or across different relationships. And even if it's a little spark that sends you down an introspective sort of a journey, I think that's super powerful. Or if you want to go to a conference and explore it deeper, that's always a good idea too.
Well, hopefully this is a good appetizer for people to do that in terms of going deeper with themselves, and what does it mean that I'm in this particular situation with this particular group? Why am I uncomfortable? What's going on? So in any event, what are we calling this again, Aiden?
Gods, heroes, and groups using mythic archetypes to understand groups and organizational dynamics.
January 18th, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. What time is that over in your world?
About
3 p.m.?
4 p.m. in Ireland.
All right. Lots of information in the show notes. And what is the name of the book?
Gods, Heroes, and Groups, Relational Dynamics Through Mythic Archetypes.
I'm just out in the last couple of months of 2024.
November, yes. Just out. Fresh up press.
All right, gentlemen, this is a good conversation, and I'm looking forward to the Sacred Inclusion Network's first exploration of 2025.
Thanks for having us on.